There remained the great question disputed in preliminary interviews. Pius VII had put forward certain pretensions which had been deemed inadmissible and which he seemingly renounced of his own accord. He then confined himself to certain demands which he doubtless considered as indispensable and which were presented in 3 notes by the first drawn up by the Cardinal Antonelli. He demanded that the grant allowed for the support of officiating priests should be raised from 13 to 14 millions, and that seminaries should be endowed by the second drawn up by the prelate Bertazzoli. He demanded the abolition of the organic articles and the 4 articles of the Declaration of the Assembly of the Clergy of France in 1682. The reformation of the law of divorce, the establishment of seminaries, exemption from military service for ecclesiastical students, the entrustment of the punishment of the crimes committed by ecclesiastics to the bishops, the increase of the salaries of the clergy and of the pensions for the monks and nuns, the legal observance of Sunday, and the prohibition of menial work on Sundays and holidays, the forbiddance of married priests to teach in the schools, the organization of religious instruction in the academies and grammar schools, the assurance of the submission of the constitutional bishops, the restoration of the Church of Saint-Geneviève as a place of worship, the daily celebration of service in the cathedrals, the reestablishment of congregations and missions, and the proclamation of Catholicism as a predominant religion. Finally, in a 3rd note, which the Pope was said to have drawn up himself, after mentioning the expenses the church and the losses which the Holy See had undergone, he recalled the gift of Charlemagne and continued that it may accordingly please your majesty, in order to render the parallel complete, to combine now in imitation of that voluntary and famous act by which Charlemagne restored St. Peter, that he had recovered by his glorious arms of the gift which Pepin, his father, had formerly made to the saint, and which had been torn away by the Lombards, whom he conquered. I speak of the Exarchate of Ravenna and the Pentapolis, to combine this act with the addition of other domains, and particularly with the duchies of Spoleto and Beneventum. These demands for restitution have been made verbally, first by Pius VII on a visit which he made to Malmaison. Napoleon had held out hopes. His Holiness afterwards came to the conclusion that there was nothing to be got, even as regards to Romagna, at least for the moment. However, in the written answer which he gave, the emperor did not reply with a pronounced negative. Should God grant to the emperor, said he, the span of life common to men, he hopes that such circumstances will arise as will enable him to ameliorate and extend the domain of the Holy Father. On every occasion he will afford him assistance and support. He is ready to second the efforts which the Holy Father may make to escape from the chaos and embarrassments of every kind in which the Holy See has been plunged by the crisis of the late war. Napoleon could do more on the eve of assuming the crown of Italy, to sever from his kingdom certain provinces which might be accounted the richest and most attached, in order to replace them under the sway of the Pope, would have been a strange gift to make to his people at his joyful ascension. But such circumstances might arise as to make it possible that, provided the Holy See was restored from chaos and its administration improved, provided again the states of the church fell in with the Napoleonic policy, the Pope might obtain an augmentation of territory. It is likely that Napoleon was here acting in good faith. This doubtless may seem unlikely in the light of other schemes which he entered upon later, but these changes were due to circumstances and do not imply deliberate knavery in his design. At the present moment, he was still inclined to think that the temporal independence of the Pope was of advantage to his spiritual independence, provided he did what was asked of him in the interest of general security. But of this he had no doubt. With the French armies and a few attentions, he said, shall always be sufficiently the master. As regard the demands made by the Pope in favor of the Church of France, the Emperor had referred them to the Minister for Worship and had accepted in their spirit and tenor the answers which Portalis had prepared. These replies show at the same time his desire to yield nothing of political importance, and a very sincere intention to improve the lot of the clergy, and in this respect at least to fulfill the engagements entered into by Cardinal Fesch. The Pope had given way on the suppression of the organic articles and the Declaration of 1682. Today, wrote Portalis, every extravagance is abandoned, and we confine ourselves to what is really pressing. He did not delay in his reply. On the reformation of the law of divorce, he answered that divorce was a civil act, that the priests were free to refuse the nuptial blessing to divorced parties, and that such a refusal could not be appealed against to the council of state, but that the civil law cannot prescribe divorce in a country where the sects which permit it are tolerated. Touching the jurisdiction of bishops over the clergy, the law was absolute, when the affair should be one of offenses concerned merely with the church discipline and punishable only by laws laid down in the canon, but if it concerns the laws of the state, the priest who had not ceased to be a citizen was still subject to the authorities charged with their execution. As regards the increase of church endowment, he answered the French cardinals, although not provided for by the Concordat, have been endowed, and 3 of them possess seats in the Senate. Salaries had been assigned to the canons and vicars general. 24,000 chapels of ease had been created, each with a grant of 500 francs. The other chapels of ease were regularly maintained at the expense of the communes. The property, the ancient buildings, which had not been alienated, had been restored to the churches. The General Council of the departments were instructed to increase the percentage of the rates to defray the cost of the repair and upkeep of buildings and the expenses of worship. The Treasury had undertaken to defray the expense of 10 metropolitan seminaries. At the request of the bishops, certain national buildings had been given up daily for the use of the diocesan seminaries. The seminaries were permitted to receive any gift or legacy of an inland. The emperor would provide chaplains for the land and sea forces. He had already authorized the appointment of chaplains to the civil hospitals. The task of providing pensions for the clergy would be carried on without interruption. The greater part of the able-bodied and respectable clergy were already employed in ecclesiastical duties. The nuns had been allowed to live in common. Those who had devoted themselves to public education had been permitted to carry out the performance of their vows. With regard to the question of conscription, the emperor promised to do all he could to reconcile the greater interests of the state with the pressing needs of the church. Prohibition of work on Sundays and holidays was refused, but the state would set the example. All outdoor and public work was forbidden to officials of every rank and class. No married priest or monk would be employed in public education. The education of the youth would never be entrusted to priests who were not in communion with the bishop. Religious instruction would be given in the grammar schools, and bishops would sit upon their boards. The constitutional bishops had submitted that there was no need to return to that point. The church of St. Genevieve would be restored as a place of worship. The bishops would be invited to celebrate daily service in the cathedrals. The congregations of men would not be permitted for the moment, but the corporations of the sisters hospitallers, had been reestablished and placed by the emperor under the protection of his mother. The existence of the Irish seminaries had been assured by their reunion. The Lazarus had been reestablished. They had received a house and an endowment of 15,000 francs. The seminary for foreign missions had just been reestablished. It was authorized to give gifts and legacies and to retrieve for its houses the goods and revenues which the third buyers had only acquired. With the intention of restoring them again, the seminary of the Holy Ghost had also been reestablished, authorized to receive gifts and legacies, and restored his own house near Orleans. The emperor would replace the sum formerly paid to the chapter of St. John Lateran by an equivalent revenue on the condition that he should enjoy the rights, prerogatives, and honors which had formerly belonged to the ancient kings of France. Lastly, the emperor explicitly refused to declare the Catholic the predominant religion. The Constitution forbade, and his oath prevented this. Such were the promises of the emperor. His successive decrees and notices issued from the Council of State from the 3rd of Nivos of the year 8, December 24th, 1804, up to the 30th of September, 1807, proved sufficiently that he kept them, and that he bestowed upon his measures in favor of the Roman Catholic Church a strength, a legal solidity, and a coherence which attests the continuity of design and the maturity of his reflection. The decrees of the Council of State alternated with its notices, which were equally efficient. On the 3rd of Nivos of the year 8, there was a notice on the exemption granted to the communal properties, churches, and parsonages from being united to the national domain. On the 6th of Pluvios, a notice on the relinquishment of the churches and parsonages to the communes. On the 15th of Ventos, a decree concerning the restitution of the goods taken from the seized collegiate churches and cathedrals, provided that they had not been alienated on the 7th of Germinal, a decree granting to the bishops of the imprimatur for the books of the church hours and prayers. On the 29th of Messidor, a decree granting to the churches the property and revenue of the brotherhoods. On the 13th of Thermidor, a decree concerning the formulation of a relief fund for infirm priests. On the 22nd of Fructidor, decree on the administration of the property restored to the churches. On the 14th of January 1806, a ministerial letter forbidding a certificate of marriage to be given to a priest. On the 20th of February, a decree establishing the imperial chapter sanctity and restoring the Church of St. Genevieve to Catholic worship. On the 18th of May, a decree concerning funeral services in the churches and funeral processions and the relinquishment of the vestries of the organization and management of funeral ceremonies. On the 30th of May, a decree uniting the suppressed churches and parsonages to the property, the vestries. On the 19th of June, a decree commanding the hospitals and charitable institutions to pay for the religious services which had been endowed with property that had been put into their possession. On the 30th of September 1807, a decree creating 2,400 scholarships in seminaries at the expense of the state, a decree raising the number of chapels of East to 30,000, a decree organizing the chapter of the Sisters Hospitallers, and a decree regulating the position of mission seminaries. Such was, to reckon only the most important characteristic acts, his anxious and careful work. Such was the fulfillment he gave of his engagements. This it was that caused Consalvi to write that Pius VII on several questions had met only with refusals, and on others with faint assurances which were never realized. Bad faith and injustice are here so evident that they lay bare the spirit of the Sacred College. Since they had obtained neither the restoration of the legations or the abolition of the organic articles, nor the proclamation of the predominant religion, they considered all that had been done for the church and its ministers as nothing. They seemed to have considered that Catholicism could not exist save where Ultramontanism was all-powerful.